Staff Sergeant Riley Vance could hear the betting start before Major Kellerman even finished explaining the mission parameters. $20, says maintenance doesn't understand half of what we're discussing. Someone whispered behind the row of folding chairs. Another voice chimed in with quiet confidence. She probably thinks the Warthog runs on regular unleaded. The briefing room at Kandahar Airfield buzzed with the kind of low energy that came after 18 straight days of operations. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across maps pinned to corkboards, and the smell of burned coffee mixed with aviation fuel that seemed permanently embedded in everything on base. Riley stood near the back wall, her hands behind her back in a loose parade rest, watching 12 A-10 pilots absorb intelligence about tomorrow's close air support mission. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar situations where someone's capabilities were underestimated based on their job title. Major Kellerman pointed to a red circle on the tactical map with his laser pointer. The target area sits in a valley with significant elevation changes and unpredictable wind patterns, he explained. We need pilots who can thread the needle between these ridge lines while maintaining accuracy on multiple ground targets. The washout rate for this type of terrain flying sits at 47%, even among our most experienced combat aviators. Captain Torres leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and glanced toward Riley's position near the maintenance status board. Hope maintenance is taking notes, he said loud enough for the front two rows to hear. Might learn something about what we actually do up there. The comment drew several chuckles and knowing looks between the pilots. Riley had been working on A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft for 6 months at this forward operating base, and the pattern never changed. Pilots saw her as just another wrench turner, someone who existed to keep their aircraft mission ready, but who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of combat flying. They spoke around her, over her, and about her, as if she were equipment rather than a person with her own background and capabilities. Master Sergeant Shun, the maintenance chief, approached Riley's position and spoke in a voice just low enough to avoid interrupting the briefing. Vance, I need you to do the post-flight inspection on Hog 7 when Captain Morrison gets back from his training sortie. He's been complaining about a vibration in the left engine during high-G maneuvers. The mention of maintenance tasks during the pilot briefing caused Captain Morrison to turn around in his seat. Make sure she checks the obvious stuff first, he said with a patronizing smile. Sometimes these vibrations are just loose panels that maintenance missed during pre-flight. Wouldn't want to ground an aircraft because someone forgot to tighten a few screws. Riley nodded to Master Sergeant Chun without changing expression, but she felt the familiar burn of being reduced to a stereotype. The pilots saw her tools and her coveralls and made assumptions about her knowledge level, her attention to detail, and her understanding of aircraft systems. They had no idea she could diagnose engine problems by sound alone, or that she understood aerodynamics better than most of them realized. Major Kellerman continued his briefing, describing wind patterns and target acquisition procedures, while Riley mentally cataloged every technical detail he mentioned. She knew the A-10's performance envelope better than anyone in that room, understood how desert thermals affected low-altitude flight patterns, and could predict which aircraft would experience handling issues in the described conditions. But her opinions remained unasked for and unwelcome. The betting pool behind her had grown more specific. $50, says she's never even been inside a cockpit, one pilot whispered. Another responded with certainty. Maintenance types think flying is just pushing buttons and pulling triggers. They have no idea about the actual skill involved. As the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out toward the flight line, Captain Torres stopped near Riley's position. Hey, maintenance, he said with mock seriousness. Try not to break anything important while we're gone saving the world. The comment earned laughs from the departing group, and Riley watched 12 pairs of flight boots disappear through the door toward aircraft they assumed she could never understand. Standing alone in the briefing room, surrounded by tactical maps and mission parameters, Riley Vance looked at the complex flight profiles outlined on the boards and made mental calculations about aircraft performance, fuel consumption, and tactical effectiveness that would have surprised every pilot who had just dismissed her as just maintenance. The assumptions they carried about her capabilities were about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the aircraft parking ramp as Riley approached Hog 7 with her inspection checklist and tool bag. Captain Morrison's A-10 sat cooling after its training sortie, heat waves shimmering off the titanium bathtub that protected the cockpit. The distinctive smell of burned jet fuel and hot metal filled the air, a combination that most people found overwhelming, but Riley had long since learned to read like a diagnostic tool. She was halfway through her external inspection when Captain Morrison appeared, still wearing his flight suit and carrying his helmet bag. Behind him walked Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, the squadron operations officer, and Captain Torres, all three men engaged in animated discussion about the morning's training results. "How's my bird looking?" "Maintenance," Morrison called out as he approached. "That vibration I mentioned is getting worse during high G pulls. Feels like the whole aircraft wants to shake apart when I push past 6 GS in a hard turn." Riley looked up from the engine intake she was examining and nodded. "I'm seeing some irregularities in the fan blade spacing," she replied. "Blade number 7 has about 0.03 inches more deflection than the others, combined with the slight oil seepage around the number 2 bearing housing. That would create exactly the vibration signature you're describing." The three pilots stopped their conversation and stared at her. Morrison's eyebrows raised slightly. "You could tell all that just by looking?" he asked with obvious skepticism. "And listening," Riley responded matter-of-factly. "The engine makes a specific harmonic frequency when Blade 7 passes through its rotation cycle. It's about 47 cycles per second off from optimal, which creates a resonance that intensifies underglow when oil pressure fluctuates." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes exchanged glances with the other pilots. "That's pretty specific technical analysis for a visual inspection," he said slowly. "Most maintenance folks would just write up engine vibration and let the specialist figure out the details." Captain Torres crossed his arms and shook his head with a condescending smile. "She's probably just repeating something she heard from one of the real engine techs," he said. "No offense, but diagnosing turbofan problems requires understanding thermodynamics and fluid mechanics that takes years to develop." Riley continued her inspection, running her hand along the engine cowling and listening to the subtle sounds of cooling metal. The number 2 bearing housing shows thermal stress patterns consistent with insufficient lubrication during high-temperature operations, she said without looking up. "You've probably been running extended sorties in this heat without adequate cool-down periods between flights." Morrison looked genuinely surprised. "How could you possibly know my flight schedule?" he asked. "The wear patterns on your brake assemblies indicate frequent heavy braking from high-speed taxi operations," Riley explained, moving to examine the landing gear. "That suggests rapid turnaround times between sorties. Combined with the thermal stress on the engine and the fact that your oil consumption has increased by about 12% over the past 2 weeks, it's clear you've been flying longer missions with shorter ground times than the aircraft was designed for." The pilot stood in stunned silence for several seconds. Finally, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes spoke up. "Where exactly did you learn to read aircraft systems like that, Sergeant Vance?" "Technical school and experience, sir," Riley replied simply, not mentioning her extensive background in aeronautical engineering or her intimate familiarity with every system on the A-10 platform. Captain Torres wasn't convinced. "Look, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but engine diagnostics isn't something you pick up from changing oil and replacing filters," he said dismissively. "Real troubleshooting requires understanding complex interactions between multiple systems that most maintenance personnel never see." Riley moved to the aircraft's weapons pylons, checking mounting points and electrical connections. "Your targeting pod has been pulling about 15% more electrical current than normal," she said matter-of-factly. "The increased draw is causing voltage fluctuations that affect your heads-up display accuracy during weapons delivery. You've probably noticed slight targeting drift during extended tracking sequences." Morrison's mouth opened slightly. "Actually, yeah, I have noticed some drift issues," he admitted, But how could you possibly know that from looking at external connections? The scorch marks around connector pins indicate arcing from voltage irregularities, Riley explained, pointing to nearly invisible discoloration on the electrical fittings. Combined with the fact that your cannon ammunition counter has been reading inconsistently according to the maintenance logs, it suggests a systematic electrical problem affecting multiple avionics systems. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stepped closer to examine the connections Riley had indicated. "I don't see any scorch marks," he said with confusion. Riley pulled a small magnifying glass from her tool bag and handed it to him. "Check the rim around the number 3 connector pin," she said. "You'll see a slight bluish discoloration that indicates repeated electrical arcing." Hayes examined the connector through the magnifying glass, his expression changing from skepticism to surprise. "You're right," he said slowly. "There's definitely discoloration there. But how did you spot that with the naked eye?" "Experience with electrical systems," Riley replied, continuing her inspection routine as if diagnosing complex technical problems was the most natural thing in the world. "You develop an eye for subtle indicators when you've worked on enough aircraft." Captain Torres shook his head in disbelief. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered to Morrison. "Next thing you know, she'll be telling us how to fly the thing." Riley paused in her inspection and looked directly at Captain Torres. "Actually, sir, based on the wear patterns I'm seeing, you might want to adjust your approach angle for desert operations," she said calmly. "The excessive break where indicates you're coming in too steep and too fast for the current density altitude conditions. A shallower approach would reduce stress on both the aircraft and improve your margin for error in these thermal conditions." The silence that followed was profound. 3 experienced combat pilots stood staring at an aircraft maintenance technician who had just demonstrated a level of technical knowledge and operational awareness that challenged every assumption they held about her capabilities and qualifications. The emergency klaxon pierced the afternoon air at 1,347 hours, sending personnel scrambling across the flight line toward the operations building. Riley was still documenting her inspection findings when the urgent announcement crackled over the base communication system. "All available A-10 pilots report to the operations center immediately. Mission Priority Alpha." She watched Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, and Captain Torres break into a run toward the operations building, their earlier conversation about her technical knowledge forgotten in the rush of emergency response. Within minutes, the flight line buzzed with activity as crew chiefs began prepping aircraft for rapid deployment. Master Sergeant Shun appeared at Riley's shoulder, slightly out of breath from his sprint across the tarmac. "Emergency close air support mission just came down from higher headquarters," he explained. "Ground forces in contact about 60 miles northeast of here. They need Warthogs overhead within 2 hours or friendly casualties are going to mount fast." Riley nodded and continued securing her inspection equipment. "Sounds like the pilots are going to have a busy afternoon," she said. Chin's expression grew troubled. "That's the problem, Vance. We might not have enough qualified pilots to cover the mission. Captain Williams is still grounded with that inner ear infection. Major Thompson and his wingmen are stuck at Bagram with weather delays. Captain Rodriguez is flying medevac escort duty and won't be back for 6 hours." The implications began crystallizing in Riley's mind as she calculated available personnel against mission requirements. "How many aircraft do they need for the mission?" she asked. "Minimum 4-ship formation for this type of operation," Chin replied. "But we've only got 5 qualified A-10 pilots on base right now, and one of them is Captain Morrison, who probably shouldn't fly with the engine problems you just identified on his aircraft." Riley glanced toward the operations building where she could see pilots gathering through the windows. The math was simple and concerning. For aircraft minimum, 5 pilots available, but 1 aircraft potentially down for maintenance issues. That left 0 margin for error, mechanical problems, or mission complications. Chin noticed her calculating expression. "What are you thinking, Vance?" "Just running numbers, Sergeant," Riley replied. "Seems like a tight situation for mission planning." The sound of raised voices drifted across the flight line from the operations building. Through the open doors, Riley could see animated discussions and pointing at wall charts. Major Kellerman emerged briefly, spoke rapidly into a radio handset, then disappeared back inside with obvious frustration. 20 minutes later, the base communication system crackled again with an updated announcement. All squadron personnel not directly involved in current flight operations report to Hangar 7 for emergency briefing. All hands evolution. Riley and Master Sergeant Chun joined a stream of personnel moving toward the designated hangar. Inside, Major Kellerman stood before a hastily assembled group of pilots, maintenance personnel, support staff, and administrative personnel. His expression was grim as he waited for the crowd to settle. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a serious problem," Kellerman began without preamble. "Friendly forces are pinned down by enemy positions in complex terrain approximately 60 miles from here. They need immediate close air support, or they're looking at significant casualties within the next 4 hours." He gestured toward a tactical map projected on the hangar wall. "The mission requires 4 8-10 aircraft operating in mountainous terrain with unpredictable wind conditions and multiple threat environments. The target area includes caves, reinforced positions, and civilian structures requiring precision weapons delivery." Captain Torres raised his hand. "Sir, what's our pilot availability for this mission?" "That's the problem," Kellerman replied with obvious frustration. "We have exactly 4 pilots available on base. Captain Morrison's aircraft has engine issues that maintenance just identified. Captain Stevens is qualified, but hasn't flown combat operations in this terrain before. Lieutenant Burke is mission ready, but this would be his first high-threat environment." The hangar fell silent as the mathematics of the situation became clear to everyone present. For pilots for a 4-aircraft mission with no backup, no margin for error, and critical friendly forces depending on immediate support. Master Sergeant Chun stepped forward. "Sir, how long would it take to get additional qualified pilots from other bases?" "Minimum 6 hours," Kellerman responded. "By then, the ground situation will have deteriorated beyond our ability to provide effective support. The friendly forces need air cover now, not tonight." Riley listened to the discussion while mentally reviewing the tactical requirements outlined on the projected map. The terrain features, target types, and weapons delivery profiles were complex but not impossible. The real challenge would be coordinating 4 aircraft in mountainous terrain while maintaining precision accuracy near friendly positions. Someone near the back of the group voiced what everyone was thinking. "So what happens if we can't fill all 4 aircraft positions, sir?" Kellerman's jaw tightened. "Then American soldiers die," he said bluntly. "The enemy knows we're short on air support right now. They're pressing their advantage while they think we can't respond effectively." Captain Morrison raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, what if we accept higher risk and fly 3 aircraft instead of 4? "Not an option," Kellerman replied immediately. "The threat environment requires 4-ship mutual support. 3 aircraft can't provide adequate coverage for the tactical situation. Either we find 4 qualified pilots or we can't take the mission." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Experienced military personnel understood that sometimes tactical situations develop faster than resources could be deployed. But that understanding didn't make the reality any easier to accept. Riley found herself studying the tactical display with growing interest. The mission profile was challenging but achievable with proper planning and execution. The terrain features were complex but navigable for pilots with adequate experience in mountainous operations. The weapons delivery requirements demanded precision, but nothing beyond the A-10's demonstrated capabilities. As Major Kellerman continued explaining the tactical situation to the assembled group, Riley realized she was analyzing the mission from a pilot's perspective rather than a maintenance technician's viewpoint. She understood the approach angles, the weapons employment zones, the coordination requirements, and the tactical decision points that would determine mission success. The discussion continued around her, but Riley's attention focused on a growing awareness that she possessed knowledge and capabilities that no one in that hangar suspected she had. Major Kellerman dismissed the General Assembly but retained all pilots and senior maintenance personnel for continued tactical planning. Riley remained near the back of the smaller group, officially present as the maintenance representative for aircraft status, but increasingly focused on the operational challenges being discussed. Captain Torres approached the tactical display and pointed to several marked positions. "Sir, these ridge lines create significant wind shear problems," he said. "Combined with the elevation changes and thermal updrafts from the valley floor, we're looking at some of the most challenging flying conditions in theater." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes nodded grimly. "The weapons delivery profiles are equally demanding," he added. "Close proximity to friendly forces means margin for error is essentially zero. One miscalculation, and we're looking at fratricide incidents." Major Kellerman studied the map with obvious frustration. "Which brings us back to our fundamental problem," he said. "This mission requires our most experienced pilots, and we're already operating with minimal qualified personnel." Captain Stevens stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, I could take one of the positions," he offered. "I know my mountain flying experience is limited, but I'm current on all weapons systems and tactical procedures." The Major shook his head. "Stevens, your last mountain operations were 18 months ago in a completely different theater. These terrain features and weather patterns are unlike anything you've encountered. I can't risk an inexperienced pilot in this environment." Lieutenant Burke raised his hand tentatively. "What about me, sir? I've been training specifically for high-threat environments." Again, Kellerman declined. "Burke, this would be your first combat operation in contested airspace. The stress factors alone could compromise mission effectiveness. We need pilots who can operate instinctively under extreme pressure." The group fell into uncomfortable silence as the reality of their situation became increasingly clear. Master Sergeant Chen finally voiced what everyone was thinking. "So we're looking at a situation where we have the aircraft and the mission requirement, but not enough qualified pilots to execute." "Exactly," Kellerman confirmed. "And before anyone suggests lowering qualification standards, understand that this isn't a training exercise. Real people are depending on precision execution in an unforgiving environment. If we send unqualified pilots, we risk losing aircraft, pilots, and the ground forces we're supposed to protect." Captain Morrison studied the tactical display intently. "Sir, what if we modified the mission profile to reduce complexity?" he suggested. "Maybe approach from a different vector or adjust the weapons delivery sequence." Kellerman pointed to various marked positions on the map. "The approach vectors are dictated by terrain and threat locations," he explained. "Enemy positions are dug into these specific locations precisely because they limit our tactical options. Any modification to reduce flying difficulty would also reduce mission effectiveness." Riley found herself mentally flying the mission profile as she listened to the discussion. The approach angles were challenging, but manageable with proper airspeed and altitude management. The weapons delivery sequences required precision timing, but nothing beyond standard tactical procedures. The coordination between 4 aircraft would demand excellent communication and situational awareness. Captain Torres voiced another concern. "Even if we could find 4 qualified pilots, sir, we're still dealing with Captain Morrison's aircraft engine problems." Maintenance identified significant issues that could affect performance under high-G operations. All eyes turned toward Riley as the maintenance representative. "Sergeant Vance," Kellerman said, "what's your assessment of aircraft availability?" Riley stepped forward slightly. "Sir, Hog 7 has engine bearing problems and electrical system irregularities that make it unsuitable for high-stress combat operations," she reported. "However, all other assigned aircraft are mission-capable with full weapons and fuel capacity. So we're down to 3 reliable aircraft for a 4-ship mission." Hayes concluded with obvious frustration. The mathematical impossibility of their situation hung heavy in the room. For aircraft required, 3 available. For experienced pilots needed, 3 qualified personnel on base. American forces under fire with time running out and no apparent solution. Major Kellerman walked to the communications equipment and picked up a radio handset. "Let me check one more time with higher headquarters about pilot availability from other bases," he said with little hope in his voice. While Kellerman made his radio calls, the remaining pilots continued studying the tactical display and discussing various scenarios, all of which led to the same conclusion. The mission was tactically sound and operationally necessary, but they lacked the human resources to execute it safely and effectively. Riley listened to their discussions while running her own mental calculations about aircraft performance, fuel consumption, weapons load configurations, and tactical coordination requirements. Every technical detail they mentioned was familiar to her, every operational challenge, something she had encountered before, every tactical decision point clear in her understanding. Captain Torres noticed her intense focus on the tactical display. Something interesting about the mission profile, maintenance, he asked with mild curiosity. Riley realized she had been studying the map with obvious expertise rather than the casual interest expected from someone in her position. Just trying to understand the technical requirements for aircraft preparation, sir, she replied carefully. Kellerman returned from his radio communication with a defeated expression. Negative on additional pilot support, he announced. Nearest qualified A-10 pilots are 8 hours away minimum. Weather delays and maintenance issues have every other squadron dealing with their own personnel shortages. The room fell silent again as the finality of their situation settled over the group. Somewhere 60 miles away, American forces were fighting for their lives while the aircraft and weapons needed to save them sat ready on the flight line, grounded by a shortage of qualified pilots. As the discussion continued around her, Riley felt the weight of knowledge she couldn't reveal and capabilities she wasn't supposed to possess. The solution to their impossible situation stood right in front of them, but hidden behind assumptions about maintenance personnel that no one thought to question. The irony was almost overwhelming. They desperately needed a fourth pilot, while dismissing the qualifications of someone who had been listening to their entire tactical discussion with complete understanding of every operational detail they considered critical. The radio crackled with another urgent transmission from the forward operating base, where American forces remained pinned down. Major Kellerman's face grew increasingly grim as he listened to the tactical update through his headset. When the transmission ended, he turned to face the assembled group with obvious frustration. Ground commander reports enemy reinforcements moving into the area, he announced. They're estimating 90 minutes before the tactical situation becomes untenable. After that, we're looking at a fighting withdrawal under fire with significant casualty projections. Captain Torres ran his hand through his hair with obvious stress. Sir, we keep coming back to the same problem, he said. We have the aircraft, we have the weapons, we have the tactical plan. We just don't have enough qualified pilots to execute the mission. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes studied the mission timeline displayed on a tactical board. Even if we could locate additional pilots right now, they need at least 30 minutes for mission briefing and aircraft preparation, he calculated. That leaves us with a 60-minute window for a mission that requires 90 minutes minimum flight time. The mathematics were becoming more impossible by the minute. Riley watched the discussion while mentally calculating fuel consumption rates, weapons delivery time frames, and tactical coordination requirements. The mission was challenging but achievable with proper execution, yet they remained focused on pilot availability rather than exploring alternative solutions. Master Sergeant Chen stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Sir, what if we accepted higher risk and attempted the mission with 3 aircraft instead of 4, he suggested. I know it's not optimal, but it might be better than no air support at all. Kellerman shook his head immediately. Sergeant, this isn't a training exercise where we can accept degraded performance, he replied firmly. 3 aircraft cannot provide adequate mutual support in this threat environment. We'd be sending pilots into a situation where tactical doctrine says they cannot succeed. Captain Morrison pointed to specific locations on the tactical display. The enemy positions are specifically designed to exploit gaps in air coverage, he explained. 4 aircraft can maintain overlapping fields of fire, while 1 aircraft makes weapons delivery runs. With only 3 aircraft, we create vulnerability windows that enemy forces will exploit. Riley found herself nodding slightly at Morrison's tactical analysis before catching herself. His assessment was accurate, but the coordination challenges he described were manageable with proper communication procedures and tactical discipline. The real limitation wasn't aircraft numbers, but pilot experience in complex terrain operations. The radio crackled again with another transmission. Kellerman listened intently, then looked up with increased urgency. Ground forces are requesting immediate smoke screen support to facilitate position changes, he reported. They're taking increasing fire and need to relocate before enemy reinforcements arrive. That adds another complexity layer to the mission profile, Hayes observed. Smoke delivery requires precision timing and coordination with ground movement. We're looking at multiple delivery passes in contested airspace with evolving tactical requirements. Captain Stevens raised his hand tentatively. Sir, I could handle smoke delivery while more experienced pilots focus on precision strikes, he offered. That might distribute mission complexity more effectively. The Major considered the suggestion briefly before rejecting it. Stevens, smoke delivery in this terrain requires the same precision flying skills as weapons delivery, he explained. Wind patterns between these ridge lines will scatter smoke unpredictably unless delivered with exact timing and placement. Riley had remained silent throughout the increasingly desperate discussion, but the tactical situation was deteriorating faster than anyone seemed willing to acknowledge. American forces were running out of time, while available resources remained grounded by qualification concerns that she knew were overstated. She stepped forward slightly, drawing attention from the group. Sir, she said carefully, what if someone with appropriate qualifications was available but hadn't been considered because of their current duty assignment? Major Kellerman looked at her with confusion. Sergeant Vance, we've accounted for every qualified pilot on this base, he replied. Unless you're suggesting we somehow overlooked someone in our personnel roster. Not overlooked, sir, Riley said, her heart rate increasing as she prepared to cross a line that would change everything, but possibly not considered because of assumptions about current job assignments. Captain Torres frowned with obvious irritation. What exactly are you suggesting? Maintenance, he asked dismissively. That we start pulling people from random duty assignments and hope they know how to fly combat aircraft. The condescending tone in Torres's voice reinforced exactly the kind of assumptions Riley had been facing for months. But with American lives at stake and time running out, she realized the moment had come to reveal capabilities she had kept hidden. Actually, sir, Riley replied with growing confidence, I'm suggesting that qualifications and current duty assignments don't always align in obvious ways. Sometimes people end up in positions that don't reflect their full range of capabilities. Kellerman studied her with growing interest. Sergeant Vance, are you saying you have information about available personnel that we haven't considered? He asked. Riley took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would shatter every assumption the group held about her background and qualifications. Sir, I'm saying that I have current A-10 pilot qualifications, including combat operations certification, mountain terrain endorsement, and precision weapons delivery authorization. The silence that followed was profound and electric. 12 sets of eyes stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief to shock. Captain Torres actually laughed, a short bark of dismissive sound that broke the tension momentarily. That's ridiculous, Torres said with obvious derision. Maintenance personnel don't have pilot qualifications. You're talking about years of training, thousands of flight hours, and certification processes that take most people their entire career to complete. Riley met his skeptical gaze directly. Sir, I completed undergraduate pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base, advanced fighter training at Luke Air Force Base, and A-10 specific training at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, she said calmly. I have over 800 hours of A-10 flight time, including combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. The room erupted in immediate questions and challenges, but Major Kellerman raised his hand for silence. His expression had shifted from skepticism to intense interest as he processed the implications of Riley's claim. Major Kellerman's raised hand barely contained the eruption of voices that followed Riley's revelation. Captain Torres stepped forward with obvious agitation, his face flushed with disbelief and irritation. This is absolutely insane, Torres declared loudly. She's maintenance personnel, sir. Grease monkey trying to play pilot when American lives are on the line. We don't have time for elaborate fantasies. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes held up a restraining hand toward Torres while keeping his eyes fixed on Riley. Sergeant Vance, these are extremely serious claims you're making, he said carefully. Pilot qualification records are easily verified. If you're fabricating credentials during a combat emergency, you're looking at court-martial and federal charges. Riley maintained her composure despite the hostile atmosphere surrounding her. Sir, I understand the seriousness of the situation, she replied calmly. I'm not fabricating anything. My qualification records are in the personnel database under my social security number and service record. Captain Morrison looked genuinely confused rather than angry. If you have pilot qualifications, why are you working aircraft maintenance? He asked. That makes absolutely no sense from a career perspective. Before Riley could answer, Captain Torres interrupted with growing hostility. Because she doesn't have pilot qualifications, he snapped. Real pilots don't work as mechanics. This is some kind of attention-seeking behavior during a crisis situation. Major Kellerman moved to the communications equipment and picked up a secure phone handset. I'm calling personnel records right now, he announced. Sergeant Vance, I need your full name, social security number, and service dates for verification. Riley provided the requested information while the group waited in tense silence. Kellerman spoke quietly into the handset, reading off her personal data and requesting immediate qualification verification from the central personnel database. The conversation lasted several minutes with multiple holds and transfers between different offices. Captain Torres paced impatiently near the tactical display. Sir, we're wasting precious time on this nonsense, he protested. Every minute we spend chasing maintenance fantasies is another minute American forces remain under fire without air support. Hayes checked his watch with obvious concern. Torres has a point about time pressure, he said. We have maybe 40 minutes left in our operational window before the ground situation becomes irretrievable. The phone conversation continued with Kellerman asking specific questions about flight training dates, aircraft qualifications, and combat operation records. His expression remained neutral, but Riley noticed his tone becoming more serious as the verification process progressed. Captain Stevens approached Riley with genuine curiosity rather than hostility. If you really have pilot qualifications, why didn't you speak up earlier when we were discussing personnel shortages? He asked. Because nobody asked maintenance personnel about their qualifications, Riley replied simply. And because revealing pilot credentials while working as a mechanic tends to create exactly the kind of reactions we're seeing right now. Torres spun around to face her with obvious anger. So you've been sitting on critical qualifications while we've been struggling with pilot shortages for months? He demanded. That's dereliction of duty at minimum. Riley met his hostile gaze without flinching. Sir, I've been performing my assigned duties as aircraft maintenance technician, she said calmly. My job assignment came from higher headquarters, not from personal choice. I've never been asked about additional qualifications. Major Kellerman concluded his phone conversation and turned to face the group with a dramatically changed expression. The silence stretched for several seconds before he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. Sergeant Riley Vance graduated number 3 in her undergraduate pilot training class at Columbus Air Force Base, he announced slowly. She completed advanced fighter training with distinction at Luke Air Force Base and finished A-10 specific training in the top 10% of her class at Davis-Monthan. The room fell into stunned silence. Captain Torres's face went through several color changes as the implications sank in. Morrison and Stevens exchanged glances of complete bewilderment. Hayes stepped closer to Kellerman. What about combat experience, sir? He asked quietly. Kellerman consulted his notes from the phone conversation. 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, he read. Total combat flight hours 847. Weapons delivery accuracy rated in the 95th percentile. No accidents, incidents, or qualification failures. Captain Torres stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as every assumption he had made about Riley's background and capabilities crumbled around him. Morrison shook his head slowly, as if trying to clear his vision. But why maintenance? Morrison asked weakly. Why would a qualified combat pilot be assigned to aircraft maintenance duties? Kellerman continued reading from his notes. Reassignment following completion of combat tours, he said. Personnel request for ground duty assignment after accumulated combat stress. Temporary assignment pending psychological evaluation and return to flight status determination. The pieces began falling into place for the assembled group. Riley wasn't an unqualified maintenance worker pretending to be a pilot. She was a qualified combat pilot who had been assigned to maintenance duties while processing through post-combat evaluation procedures. Hayes looked directly at Riley with newfound respect. Sergeant Vance, what's your current flight status? He asked formally. Qualified and current, sir, Riley replied. I've been maintaining flight currency through simulator training and periodic check rides. My medical clearance was renewed last month, and my combat readiness status is active. The Tactical Situation Board continued displaying the urgent mission requirements while time ticked away, but the dynamic in the room had shifted completely. They weren't looking at a maintenance worker with delusions of flying capability. They were facing a fully qualified combat pilot who had been hiding in plain sight while they struggled with personnel shortages. Captain Torres finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You've been qualified this entire time, he said with obvious shock. While we've been talking about washout rates and qualification requirements, you've been standing right here with more combat experience than most of us. Riley nodded simply. Yes, sir, she confirmed. I've been listening to every tactical discussion, understanding every operational requirement, and watching qualified aircraft remain grounded because nobody thought to ask maintenance personnel about their background qualifications. Major Kellerman stared at Riley for several long seconds as the full implications of her revealed qualifications sank in. The tactical display continued showing the deteriorating ground situation while precious minutes ticked away, but now they had a potential solution to their impossible personnel shortage. Sergeant Vance, Kellerman said formally, I'm ordering you to immediate flight status for this emergency operation. Can you be mission ready in 20 minutes? Riley straightened to attention. Yes, sir, she replied without hesitation. I'll need flight gear and aircraft assignment, but I can be ready for immediate departure. Captain Torres stepped forward, still struggling to process the dramatic reversal of their situation. Sir, with all due respect, he said carefully, shouldn't we verify her current proficiency before committing to a combat mission? It's been months since her last flight operations. Kellerman checked his watch with obvious impatience. Torres, we have 37 minutes before our operational window closes, he said sharply. Ground forces are taking casualties while we debate qualification details. Sergeant Vance either flies this mission or American soldiers die. Those are our options. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes approached Riley with newfound professional respect. What aircraft do you prefer for this mission profile? He asked. We have 3 operational A-10S available with full weapons loads. Riley had been mentally reviewing aircraft status throughout the discussion. Hog 4 has the most recent engine overhaul and optimal fuel efficiency for extended loiter operations, she replied immediately. Hog 6 has superior avionics packages for precision targeting in mountainous terrain. Either aircraft would be suitable for the mission requirements. Captain Morrison looked genuinely impressed by her immediate technical analysis. You've been tracking our aircraft status this entire time, he observed with amazement. As maintenance technician, I've been responsible for keeping detailed records on every system, Riley explained. I know the performance characteristics, fuel consumption rates, weapons accuracy, and mechanical reliability of every aircraft in our inventory. Master Sergeant Shun appeared with an armload of flight gear, including helmet, survival vest, and tactical equipment. Sergeant Vance, this gear is sized for your specifications, he announced. I pulled it from supply while the Major was making phone calls. Riley accepted the equipment and began the rapid process of changing from maintenance coveralls to full flight gear. The transformation was swift and professional, demonstrating familiarity with combat preparation procedures that surprised the watching pilots. Hayes coordinated mission assignments, while Riley prepared for flight operations. Morrison, you'll take flight lead with Hog 2, he announced. Stevens, you're flying Hog 4 as wingman. Torres, you have Hog 6 in the number 3 position. Sergeant Vance, you'll complete the 4-ship formation in Hog 5. Captain Torres looked uncomfortable with the rapid mission planning. Sir, shouldn't someone with more recent command experience take overall flight leadership? He suggested. Kellerman shook his head decisively. Morrison has the most experience in mountainous terrain operations, he replied. Flight leadership assignments are based on tactical expertise, not rank considerations. This mission requires operational competence, not command hierarchy. Riley finished donning her flight gear and moved to the tactical display for mission briefing. The approach vectors, target priorities, and coordination procedures were familiar from her earlier analysis, but now she was participating as an active pilot rather than an observer. Morrison pointed to specific locations on the tactical map. We'll approach from the northwest using these ridge lines for terrain masking, he explained. Primary targets are enemy positions marked Alpha through Delta. Secondary targets include supply routes and reinforcement positions. The briefing continued with detailed discussion of weapons delivery sequences, communication procedures, and emergency protocols. Riley absorbed every detail while mentally preparing for her first combat flight operations in 8 months. Hayes checked mission timeline calculations on his tactical computer. We have 14 minutes for final aircraft preparation and departure, he announced. Ground forces are requesting immediate smokescreen support, followed by precision strikes on enemy positions. Captain Stevens raised a concern about coordination timing. Sir, if we're supporting ground movement with smoke delivery, timing becomes critical for friendly force safety, he said. Any delay or miscommunication could result in fratricide incidents. Riley had been considering the same tactical challenge. The smoke delivery requires precise wind calculation and coordination with ground commander movement signals, she observed. We'll need constant communication with forward observers to ensure proper timing. Morrison nodded approvingly at her tactical awareness. Exactly right, he agreed. This isn't a standard bombing mission where we can work independently. We're providing close air support with friendly forces in immediate proximity to target areas. The complexity of the mission was significant, but Riley felt the familiar surge of confidence that came with returning to her primary area of expertise. After months of working on aircraft instead of flying them, she was finally returning to the role for which she had trained extensively. Kellerman made final radio contact with higher headquarters while the pilots completed mission preparation. Ground commander confirms enemy reinforcements are moving into position, he reported. Our window for effective intervention is closing rapidly. Master Sergeant Chen appeared with aircraft keys and final status reports. All 4 aircraft are fueled, armed, and ready for immediate departure, he announced. Engines are pre-warmed and systems checks are complete. Riley accepted the keys for Hog 5 and felt the weight of responsibility settling around her. American forces were depending on her performance after months of hiding her capabilities behind a maintenance technician's coveralls. Captain Torres approached her with obvious reluctance and what might have been the beginning of respect. Sergeant Vance, he said carefully, I owe you an apology for my earlier comments. I made assumptions based on job assignment rather than actual qualifications. Riley nodded acknowledgement without lingering on the past tensions. Sir, we have a mission to complete, she replied simply. Personal issues can be addressed after we bring everyone home safely. Morrison called for final equipment checks as the 4 pilots prepared to move toward their aircraft. The transformation from impossible personnel shortage to fully staffed combat mission had taken less than 20 minutes, but now came the real test of Riley's hidden capabilities under actual combat conditions. The flight line buzzed with urgent activity as 4 pilots moved toward their assigned aircraft under the afternoon sun. Riley approached Hog 5 with practiced efficiency, her months of maintenance experience providing intimate knowledge of every system and component on the A-10 platform. The irony wasn't lost on her that she probably knew this specific aircraft better than any pilot had ever known their assigned machine. Captain Morrison reached his aircraft first and began the rapid but thorough pre-flight inspection required for combat operations. His voice carried across the tarmac as he coordinated timing with the other pilots. "We have 11 minutes for pre-flight and engine start," he called out. Taxi and departure immediately following. Riley began her external inspection of Hog 5, moving with the systematic precision of someone who had performed this routine hundreds of times from both maintenance and pilot perspectives. She checked control surfaces, weapons mounts, and engine intakes while mentally reviewing the tactical plan and aircraft performance characteristics. Captain Torres was struggling with a reluctant auxiliary power unit on Hog 6. The starting system cycled repeatedly without successful ignition, creating delays that ate into their already compressed timeline. "Maintenance," he called toward Riley with obvious frustration, before catching himself and switching to her new designation. Sergeant Vance, any suggestions for this APU problem?" Riley glanced toward his aircraft and immediately identified the issue from the sound patterns and visible exhaust characteristics. "Sir, try cycling the fuel boost pump twice before engaging the starter," she called back. "The fuel pressure is building too slowly for reliable ignition in this temperature." Torres followed her suggestion, and the auxiliary power unit fired successfully on the next attempt. He looked toward Riley with obvious surprise and growing respect. "How did you diagnose that from 50 feet away?" he asked. "8 months of maintaining these exact aircraft, sir," Riley replied while continuing her own pre-flight inspection. "You learn to recognize system problems by sound, sight, and timing patterns." Captain Stevens was having difficulty with his weapons system initialization on Hog 4. The targeting computer displayed error codes that he couldn't immediately resolve. The troubleshooting checklist provided multiple potential solutions, but time pressure made systematic diagnosis challenging. Riley heard the frustration in Stevens' voice and moved to assist without being asked. "The error code indicates a synchronization problem between the targeting pod and the central computer," she explained while examining his display screens. "Try reinitializing the targeting system while the weapons computer is in standby mode." Stevens followed her technical guidance, and the error codes cleared immediately. "That's impressive troubleshooting," he said with genuine appreciation. Most pilots would have spent 10 minutes working through the written checklist. Master Sergeant Chen appeared on the flight line with updated intelligence information. "Ground forces report enemy movement accelerating," he announced. "Estimated time for enemy reinforcements to reach friendly positions is now 43 minutes. The timeline pressure intensified as all 4 pilots completed their pre-flight preparations and moved toward engine start procedures. Riley settled into the cockpit of Hog 5 and felt the familiar sensation of returning to her natural environment. The switches, displays, and controls were exactly where her muscle memory expected them to be. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio frequency as he coordinated engine start sequence. "Flight of 4, engines are on my mark," he transmitted. "Start engines now." The distinctive sound of 4 810 engines spooling up filled the air as turbofan compressors accelerated toward operational speed. Riley monitored engine parameters while running through her mental checklist of systems activation and verification procedures. Captain Torres encountered another problem as his engine reached operating temperature. Oil pressure readings were fluctuating outside normal parameters, potentially indicating the bearing problems Riley had identified during her earlier inspection. This could ground his aircraft and reduce their formation to 3 ships. Torres's voice carried obvious concern as he reported the issue. "Led, this is 3. I'm showing oil pressure irregularities that might be grounds for abort," he transmitted. Riley had been monitoring the radio discussion while completing her own systems checks. "3, this is 4, she transmitted. Try reducing engine speed to 65% and monitor pressure stabilization. The bearing tolerances are within acceptable limits if you avoid high power settings during taxi and takeoff." Morrison's voice showed surprise at Riley's technical intervention. "For Can you confirm that assessment from maintenance perspective? He asked. Affirmative, lead, Riley replied. I performed detailed inspection of 3's engine systems this morning. The bearing wear is measurable but not critical for single mission operations at reduced power settings. Torres followed Riley's guidance, and his oil pressure readings stabilized within acceptable parameters. Thanks for the technical save, he transmitted with obvious relief. I'll monitor parameters throughout the mission. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes appeared on the flight line with final mission updates from the Tactical Operations Center. Ground Commander is requesting immediate departure, he announced over the radio frequency. Friendly forces are taking increasing casualties and need air support within 30 minutes. Morrison acknowledged the urgency while coordinating taxi clearance with the control tower. Flight of 4 ready for taxi and immediate departure, he transmitted, requesting direct routing to target area with minimum delay vectors. The control tower granted immediate clearance with priority handling for the emergency combat mission. Flight 74 cleared at taxi runway 09, wind calm, altimeter 299er2, contact departure control on frequency 254.7. As the 4 aircraft began moving toward the runway, Riley felt the weight of responsibility settling around her. After 8 months of hiding her capabilities behind maintenance coveralls, she was finally returning to combat operations where her skills and experience would be tested under the most demanding conditions possible. The taxi to the runway took only minutes, but during that time, Riley reviewed every aspect of the tactical plan, aircraft performance characteristics, and coordination procedures required for mission success. Her fellow pilots had accepted her presence in the formation, but now came the real test of proving herself under actual combat conditions. Morrison's voice carried final coordination instructions as they approached the runway threshold. Flight check-in for departure, he transmitted. 2, 3, Torres responded. 4, Riley added, her voice steady and professional despite the significance of the moment. The radio calls were routine and familiar, but they marked Riley's transition from dismissed maintenance worker to active combat pilot responsible for saving American lives under fire. The 4A-10 Thunderbolts accelerated down runway 09, with Morrison leading the formation into the harsh Afghan afternoon sky. Riley felt the familiar surge of power as her aircraft lifted off, the twin turbofan engines providing reliable thrust that carried her away from months of ground-based maintenance duties and back into her natural element of combat aviation. As the formation climbed toward their assigned altitude, radio chatter from the Tactical Operations Center provided increasingly urgent updates about the ground situation. Hawk Base, this is Overlord 7, transmitted the ground controller. Friendly forces are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Enemy reinforcements estimated 15 minutes from contact. Morrison acknowledged the transmission while coordinating flight routing toward the target area. Overlord 7, Flight 74, is airborne with 4 ships, full weapons load, estimated time to target area 12 minutes, he responded. Riley monitored the tactical frequency while running final systems checks on her weapons and targeting equipment. Everything functioned perfectly, but she was acutely aware that her performance over the next hour would determine whether her fellow pilots viewed her as a legitimate combat aviator or a maintenance worker who had somehow talked her way into a cockpit. Captain Torres's voice carried obvious tension as he reported continued engine concerns. Lead, this is 3. Oil pressure is holding steady, but I'm seeing temperature fluctuations that might indicate developing problems, he transmitted. For copies 3, Riley responded immediately. Monitor oil temperature every 5 minutes and reduce power settings if temperature exceeds normal operating range. Your engine will complete this mission if managed properly. Torres acknowledged her guidance with noticeably more respect than he had shown during their earlier ground discussions. 3 copies, 4. Thanks for the technical monitoring. The flight continued northeast toward the mountainous terrain where American forces remained pinned down by enemy fire. As they approached the target area, The landscape below transformed from desert flatlands to increasingly complex ridge lines and valleys that created challenging flying conditions. Captain Stevens's voice showed growing concern as he studied the terrain features ahead. Lead, the wind patterns between those ridge lines are going to create significant turbulence for weapons delivery, he observed. Riley had been analyzing the same atmospheric conditions and calculating their effects on aircraft performance and weapons accuracy. For to flight, recommend approach from bearing 270 to take advantage of prevailing wind patterns, she transmitted. Current atmospheric conditions favor northwest approach vectors for stable weapons delivery. Morrison acknowledged her tactical input with obvious appreciation. Good analysis. 4. We'll adjust approach accordingly. The ground controller's voice crackled over the radio with increasing urgency as they neared the target area. Flight 74, friendly forces are requesting immediate smoke screen deployment to facilitate position changes. Enemy fire is preventing movement to better defensive positions. Riley checked her weapons configuration and confirmed smoke munition availability while calculating delivery parameters for the complex terrain. Lead, is ready for smoke delivery on target coordinates, she transmitted. Recommend sequential deployment, starting with northern positions to account for wind drift patterns. Morrison coordinated final approach procedures as the target area became visible ahead. Flight, we're approaching initial point for smoke delivery. Maintain formation spacing and prepare for immediate weapons employment. The radio frequency suddenly erupted with transmissions from multiple ground units reporting contact with enemy forces. American voices called for immediate air support while describing target locations and friendly force positions with increasing desperation. Overlord 7, this is Bravo 26, transmitted 1 ground unit. We are taking heavy casualties and need immediate close air support. Enemy positions are dug into the ridge line approximately 400 meters northwest of our location. Riley studied the tactical display while identifying target locations and calculating weapons delivery profiles. The enemy positions were well concealed among rocky outcroppings that would require precision accuracy to avoid collateral damage to friendly forces positioned nearby. Captain Torres's engine temperature alarm activated as they began their descent toward the target area. Lead, this is 3. I'm getting temperature warnings that might require power reduction, he reported with obvious concern. For copies, 3. Riley responded immediately. You can complete the mission at reduced power settings, but avoid extended high-power operations. Focus on single-pass weapons delivery rather than multiple attack runs. The formation descended through increasing atmospheric turbulence as mountain thermals and wind patterns created challenging flying conditions. Riley felt her aircraft buffeted by air currents while maintaining precise formation position and preparing for immediate weapons employment. Ground controller transmissions became more urgent as enemy reinforcements approached friendly positions. Flight 74. Time is critical. Transmitted Overlord 7. Friendly forces must move to alternate positions within 10 minutes or face being overrun. Morrison acknowledged the time pressure while coordinating attack sequence. Flight copies time constraints. Prepare for immediate smoke deployment followed by precision strikes on designated targets. Riley armed her smoke munitions and selected delivery parameters while studying the ground tactical situation through her targeting pod. Enemy positions were clearly visible among the rocky terrain, but friendly forces were positioned close enough to require extreme accuracy in weapons placement. As they approached weapons delivery range, Riley realized that months of hiding her capabilities were about to end in the most definitive way possible. Her performance over the next few minutes would either validate her qualifications beyond any doubt or prove that combat flying required skills that couldn't be maintained through part-time currency training. The moment of truth was approaching as 4 8-10 aircraft prepared to engage enemy forces threatening American lives. Riley's hands moved across familiar controls while her mind calculated delivery parameters that would demonstrate whether a maintenance technician could truly perform as a combat pilot when lives depended on precision execution. Lead, for is ready for weapons employment. She transmitted with steady confidence as the target area grew larger in her windscreen and American forces waited for salvation from above. The four 8-10 aircraft descended through turbulent mountain air toward the valley where American forces fought desperately against entrenched enemy positions. Riley adjusted her targeting pod display while calculating wind drift and delivery parameters for the critical smokescreen mission that would allow friendly forces to reposition before enemy reinforcements arrived. Morrison's voice carried the weight of command responsibility as he coordinated final attack procedures. Flight, we're approaching weapons employment range, he transmitted. You have lead for smoke delivery. Make it count. Riley felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied transition from flight operations to active combat engagement. Her targeting pod locked onto the designated coordinates while she fine-tuned delivery parameters for maximum effectiveness in the challenging wind conditions. Roger, lead, for has the target, she responded with professional calm. Beginning smoke delivery run now. She banked her aircraft into the approach vector she had calculated earlier, compensating for crosswinds and thermal updrafts that would affect munition trajectory. The enemy positions were clearly visible through her targeting system, but more importantly, she could see friendly forces pinned down in defensive positions that left them vulnerable to flanking attacks. Ground controller's voice crackled with desperate urgency. Flight 7-4, friendly forces are taking casualties and must move immediately. Enemy reinforcements are 3 minutes from contact. Riley lined up her delivery pass with precision that reflected hundreds of hours of combat experience and months of intimate knowledge about this specific aircraft's performance characteristics. Her maintenance background provided insights into weapons system capabilities that most pilots never fully understood. Smoke deployment. Now, she transmitted as she released the first canister. The smoke munition arced through the air with perfect trajectory, deploying exactly where Riley had calculated it would provide optimal screening for friendly force movement. White phosphorus created an immediate visual barrier between American positions and enemy observation points. But the single smoke screen wasn't sufficient for the tactical situation. Riley immediately adjusted her approach for a second delivery pass, demonstrating the kind of aggressive flying that separated combat veterans from training graduates. For his making second pass for additional screening, she transmitted while banking hard to avoid enemy ground fire that erupted from the ridgeline positions. Captain Stevens's voice showed amazement at Riley's aggressive maneuvering under fire. That's some impressive flying in these wind conditions, he transmitted. Captain Torres, monitoring Riley's performance while dealing with his own engine temperature concerns, watched her execute a textbook weapons delivery sequence under challenging conditions. She's flying like she's been doing this her whole career, he said over the internal frequency to Morrison. Riley's second smoke deployment created additional screening that allowed ground forces to begin their tactical movement toward better defensive positions. But enemy forces responded by increasing their rate of fire, creating dangerous conditions for the repositioning American troops. Overlord 7, this is Bravo 2-6, transmitted the ground commander. We are moving under smoke cover, but taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate suppression of enemy positions Alpha through Charlie. Morrison coordinated the transition from smoke delivery to precision strike operations. Flight, target priorities are Alpha through Charlie on the ridgeline. Maintain separation and watch for friendly forces in the valley floor. Riley had already identified the target positions and calculated attack vectors that would provide maximum suppression effect while avoiding friendly fire incidents. The enemy positions were well fortified among rocky outcroppings that required precision weapons placement. For his rolling in on target Alpha, she transmitted as she initiated her attack run. Her approach was textbook perfect, compensating for wind conditions and terrain features while maintaining the aggressive flying attitude necessary for effective close air support. The targeting pod locked onto the enemy position with laser precision as she prepared for weapons release. But as Riley lined up her shot, Enemy anti-aircraft fire erupted from concealed positions that hadn't appeared on their initial reconnaissance. Tracer rounds streaked past her cockpit, while surface-to-air missiles created additional threats that required immediate evasive maneuvering. For his taking heavy ground fire, she transmitted while pulling into a defensive turn that stressed her aircraft to its operational limits. Captain Torres watched Riley's evasive maneuvering with growing respect and concern. "She's handling that defensive flying better than most pilots handle training exercises," he observed. Despite the intense enemy fire, Riley maintained her attack profile and delivered her weapons with precision that silenced the enemy position designated as Target Alpha. The explosion echoed through the valley as secondary detonations indicated successful destruction of enemy ammunition supplies. "Good hit," Fort Morrison transmitted. "Target Alpha is neutralized." But the mission was far from complete. Enemy positions Bravo and Charlie continued firing on American forces, while additional threats emerged from previously unidentified locations. The tactical situation required continued close air support under increasingly dangerous conditions. Riley immediately began calculating her next attack run while monitoring fuel consumption and weapons availability. Her aircraft had performed flawlessly despite the mechanical concerns she had identified during maintenance inspection, but combat operations demanded careful resource management. For setting up for Target Bravo, she transmitted while adjusting her approach vector to avoid the anti-aircraft positions that had engaged her during the previous attack. Ground controller's voice carried desperate urgency as enemy reinforcements approached friendly positions. Flight 74. Enemy forces are moving to flank friendly positions from the south. Request immediate interdiction of enemy movement. Riley looked toward the southern approach routes and immediately identified enemy personnel advancing through terrain features that would allow them to attack American forces from behind. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly despite their successful weapons delivery. Led for has visual on enemy reinforcement movement, she transmitted, requesting clearance to engage targets of opportunity along southern approach routes. Morrison granted immediate clearance while coordinating with other flight members. For is cleared hot on southern targets. 2 and 3 maintained coverage on ridgeline positions. As Riley banked toward the new threat axis, she realized that her performance under actual combat conditions was exceeding even her own expectations. Months of maintenance work had provided insights into aircraft capabilities that enhanced her flying effectiveness, while her combat experience allowed her to operate instinctively under extreme pressure. The combination of technical knowledge and operational experience was proving to be a formidable asset in the most demanding flying conditions possible. Riley banked hard toward the southern approach routes where enemy reinforcements advanced through rocky terrain toward American positions. Her targeting pod acquired multiple personnel moving in tactical formation, presenting the kind of complex target engagement that separated experienced combat pilots from those with only training background. For has visual on approximately 15 enemy personnel in tactical movement. She transmitted while calculating weapons delivery parameters for maximum effectiveness against dispersed targets. The enemy forces were using terrain features for concealment while advancing toward positions that would allow them to attack American troops from behind. Riley's attack would need to be precise and devastating to prevent the flanking maneuver that could overwhelm friendly defenses. Captain Morrison monitored Riley's tactical analysis while coordinating with ground controllers. For ground forces are depending on your interdiction of that southern movement, he transmitted, "Take your time and make it count." But time was exactly what they didn't have. Enemy reinforcements were moving rapidly toward attack positions, while American forces remained engaged with the ridgeline positions. Riley needed to execute immediate weapons delivery before the tactical situation became irreversible. For his rolling and hot, she transmitted as she initiated her attack run against the moving enemy formation. Her approach was aggressive and precise, diving through defensive anti-aircraft fire while maintaining laser lock on the target area. The enemy formation scattered as they detected incoming aircraft, but Riley had anticipated their dispersal patterns and adjusted her weapons parameters accordingly. Riley released her munitions with timing that reflected not just combat experience, but intimate understanding of weapons system capabilities gained through months of maintenance work. She knew exactly how her aircraft's targeting computer calculated trajectory compensation and how atmospheric conditions affected precision delivery. The weapons impacted with devastating accuracy, creating multiple explosions that neutralized the enemy reinforcement threat and eliminated the flanking danger to American forces. Secondary detonations indicated successful destruction of enemy supplies and equipment. Outstanding hit for Morrison transmitted with obvious admiration. Enemy reinforcement threat is neutralized. Captain Torres, who had initially dismissed Riley as just maintenance personnel, watched her tactical performance with growing amazement. She's flying and fighting better than pilots with twice her supposed experience, he observed over the flight frequency. But the mission wasn't complete. Enemy positions on the ridge line continued engaging American forces with accurate fire that prevented effective counterattack. Riley immediately began calculating attack vectors for the remaining threat positions while monitoring her fuel and weapon status. For his setting up for ridgeline targets, she transmitted while scanning for additional anti-aircraft threats that might have remained concealed during her previous attacks. Ground controller's voice carried renewed hope as the tactical situation began shifting in favor of American forces. Flight 74. Friendly forces are reporting reduced enemy fire and successful position improvements. Continue suppression of remaining ridgeline positions. Riley approached the ridgeline targets with the kind of aggressive flying that demonstrated complete confidence in her aircraft's capabilities and her own skill level. She had identified specific weapon employment techniques that would maximize suppression effect while conserving ammunition for potential additional targets. Her next weapons delivery was even more precise than her previous attacks, placing munitions exactly where they would create maximum psychological and physical impact on remaining enemy positions. The explosions echoed through the valley, while debris and smoke marked successful target destruction. Target Bravo is neutralized, Riley transmitted as she pulled out of her attack dive and scanned for additional threats. Captain Stevens, flying in the number 2 position, had been watching Riley's combat performance with professional admiration. "For your weapon's delivery accuracy is exceptional," he transmitted. "That last hit was textbook perfect for terrain and target type." Riley continued scanning the battlefield while calculating fuel consumption and mission timeline. Her aircraft was performing flawlessly despite the mechanical concerns identified during pre-flight inspection, but combat operations required constant monitoring of aircraft systems and mission parameters. Lead for showing good fuel state and full weapons availability for continued operations, she reported while maintaining tactical awareness of the evolving ground situation. Ground forces began reporting successful repositioning to improve defensive positions as enemy fire decreased significantly. The smoke screens Riley had deployed earlier continued providing concealment, while American troops consolidated their tactical advantages. Overlord 7, this is Bravo 2-6, transmitted the ground commander. Enemy contact has decreased substantially. Friendly forces are secure in improved positions and no longer in immediate danger of being overrun. The radio transmissions indicated mission success, but Riley maintained combat vigilance while scanning for additional threats or opportunities for target engagement. Her performance had exceeded all expectations, but combat operations demanded continued alertness until mission completion. Morrison coordinated mission assessment while preparing for potential additional tasking. Flight. Ground forces report tactical situation is stabilized. Maintain overwatch while ground commander assesses requirements for continued air support. Riley had proven her combat capabilities beyond any possible doubt through aggressive flying, precise weapons delivery, and tactical awareness that exceeded the performance of pilots with supposedly superior qualifications. Her months of hiding behind maintenance coveralls were over, replaced by demonstrated excellence under the most demanding conditions possible. Captain Torres's voice carried obvious respect as he acknowledged Riley's performance. "For that was some of the best close air support flying I've witnessed in my career," he transmitted. "Your tactical awareness and weapons delivery were outstanding." The transformation was complete. Riley had evolved from dismissed maintenance worker to recognized combat pilot through undeniable demonstration of superior capabilities under actual combat conditions. Her fellow pilots now viewed her not as someone who had talked her way into a cockpit, but as a skilled aviator who had earned their professional respect through exceptional performance when American lives depended on precision execution. As the flight maintained overwatch above the secure ground positions, Riley felt the satisfaction that came from successfully completing a critical mission while proving capabilities that others had refused to recognize. The assumptions and dismissive attitudes were gone, replaced by earned respect and professional acknowledgement of her true qualifications. The 4A-10 aircraft maintained protective overwatch above the valley as American ground forces consolidated their improved tactical positions. Riley continued scanning for potential threats while monitoring radio communications that confirmed mission success and friendly force security. The immediate crisis had passed, but the psychological transformation among her fellow pilots was just beginning. Ground controller's voice carried obvious relief as he provided final mission assessment. Flight 74, ground commander reports all friendly forces are secure in improved positions. Enemy contact has ceased and reinforcement threats have been neutralized. Outstanding mission execution. Captain Morrison coordinated flight departure procedures while processing the remarkable performance he had witnessed from Riley. "For your combat flying today was exceptional," he transmitted. "I've been flying a 10S for 8 years, and I've never seen better close air support execution under those conditions." As the formation began climbing away from the target area toward home base, Captain Torres finally voiced what all the pilots were thinking. "For I owe you a significant apology," he transmitted. "I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your job assignment rather than your actual qualifications. Your performance today was superior to most pilots I've flown with." Riley acknowledged the apology with professional grace while maintaining her tactical scan for potential threats during their departure. "3. We all make assumptions based on limited information," she replied. "What matters is mission accomplishment and bringing everyone home safely." The flight back to Kandahar Airfield provided time for reflection on the dramatic events of the afternoon. Riley had transformed from dismissed maintenance worker to recognized combat pilot through undeniable demonstration of superior capabilities under the most demanding conditions possible. Captain Stevens joined the conversation as they approached their home base. "For your technical knowledge of aircraft systems combined with combat flying skills created capabilities I didn't know existed," he transmitted. "The way you diagnosed and managed Torres's engine problems while executing perfect weapons delivery was impressive." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes's voice appeared on the radio frequency as the tower coordinated their landing sequence. "Flight 74, this is Ops. Ground debrief will be conducted immediately upon landing. Higher Headquarters is requesting detailed mission report with emphasis on pilot performance and tactical effectiveness." Morrison acknowledged the debrief requirement while coordinating landing approach procedures. The afternoon sun was setting behind the mountains as 4 successful A-10S approached runway 09 with a completed mission and transformed understanding among the aircrew. As Riley configured her aircraft for landing, she reflected on the journey from hiding her qualifications to proving them under combat conditions. The months of working as a maintenance technician while possessing pilot credentials had created unique insights that enhanced her flying effectiveness beyond normal training levels. The landing sequence proceeded smoothly with each aircraft touching down safely after successful mission completion. Riley taxied Hog 5 toward the parking ramp where ground crews waited to service aircraft and debrief aircrew on mission results. Master Sergeant Shin appeared on the flight line as the pilots shut down their engines and began post-flight procedures. His expression showed obvious pride as he approached Riley's aircraft. "Sergeant Vance, "The radio reports from your mission were incredible," he said. "Word is already spreading through the maintenance community about your performance." Riley completed her shutdown checklist and climbed out of the cockpit, returning to Earth after hours of combat flying that had validated her hidden qualifications. The transition from pilot back to maintenance technician felt surreal after proving herself as a superior combat aviator. Major Kellerman approached the flight line with obvious satisfaction as he surveyed 4 successful aircraft and 4 returning pilots. The mission had succeeded beyond expectations, saving American lives while revealing capabilities that had been hiding in plain sight for months. "Sergeant Vance," Kellerman said formally, "your performance today was outstanding. I'm recommending you for immediate return to full flight status and combat pilot assignment. The Air Force needs aviators with your combination of technical knowledge and operational excellence." Captain Torres appeared beside Major Kellerman with an expression of genuine respect and professional admiration. "Sir, I'd like to formally request Sergeant Vance for my flight team," he said. "Her combat performance today exceeded anything I've seen from pilots with twice her supposed experience level." The irony wasn't lost on Riley that the same pilot who had dismissed her as just maintenance was now requesting her assignment to his combat unit. The transformation from skeptic to advocate demonstrated how performance under pressure could overcome the strongest preconceptions. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, character, or if you've had a similar situation happen to you before where someone's hidden capabilities surprised everyone around them. Captain Morrison joined the group with obvious enthusiasm for Riley's demonstrated capabilities. "Sergeant Vance, your technical background combined with combat flying skills created advantages I didn't know were possible," he said. "The way you managed aircraft systems while executing complex tactical operations was exceptional." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes approached with official documentation already prepared for Riley's status change. "Sergeant Vance, effective immediately, you're reassigned to active flight status with combat pilot designation," he announced. "Your maintenance experience will be valuable in flight operations, but your primary duty is now as an A-10 combat pilot." The assembled group of pilots and maintenance personnel represented a complete reversal of the morning's assumptions and attitudes. Riley had evolved from dismissed maintenance worker to sought-after combat pilot through demonstrated excellence that no one could deny or explain away. Master Sergeant Chun stepped forward with obvious pride in his former maintenance technician. "Sergeant Vance, you've shown that capabilities and job assignments don't always align in obvious ways," he observed. "Your performance today will change how we evaluate personnel potential across the entire base." As the sun set behind the Afghan mountains, Riley stood surrounded by pilots and maintainers who now viewed her with professional respect and personal admiration. The months of hiding her qualifications were over, replaced by earned recognition and assignment to duties that matched her true capabilities. The transformation was complete. She had proven that assumptions about job titles and background assignments could mask exceptional capabilities that emerge when circumstances demand excellence. Sometimes the most qualified person for critical missions is hiding in plain sight, waiting for the opportunity to demonstrate their true potential when lives depend on superior performance. Her journey from just maintenance to recognized combat pilot had required courage, competence, and a willingness to risk everything when American forces needed capabilities that only she possessed.